Hello, this is Kyle, also known as AlienTude. Today reviewing this custom model 1734 Dragoon Cavalry sword. Now this sword was designed by sword friend Daniel and made by Purna Darnal. Daniel sent it to me as a loaner to review after Purna sadly passed away relatively recently. So, like I said, Model 1734, this was inspired by, going off that date, one of the earliest model swords that I can think of personally. But frankly, I am not, this sword's not in my wheelhouse. I'm used to medieval period swords and then dabbling into katana as well. This is post-Renaissance when swords started having actual models. And it's just not what I'm familiar with. So this review is not really going to be a normal review for me, and honestly it's more of a showcase of this sword than a review. Now, as I said, unfortunately Purna Darnal, the maker of this sword, did pass away recently, and therefore even if you want to get one of these swords, if you wanted to, or get something similar or anything, you couldn't do it through Purna, unfortunately. Now, I know his family is continuing his kukri making business, Great Gurkha Khukuri, which I will link in the description. I don't know if they're continuing the custom business, but it's if you're interested in that, it is something worthwhile to reach out to them and find out. So let's talk about the design of this sword. Now, like I said, sword friend Daniel designed this, and he did a lot of research into this specific sword model, the 1734. He got a good number of pictures of originals. He found the actual specifications from a piece of literature and really went deep into what it takes to make a sword in this type. And while I'm talking about this, there's going to be pictures up of his design, of originals, of Purna's process as he was making it, just a whole bunch of different things. Now, one thing that I immediately noticed when Daniel was showing me this sword and some of the originals is that the originals were all double-edged blades. This is quite obviously a single-edged blade. Well, if we look at the document that explains what this sword could be, it talks about double-edged swords, and also it could have a backsword blade. Now, sword friend Daniel was not really able to find any examples of this sword with a backsword blade, so he had to come up with the design of the blade himself. So one of Daniel's design goals for this sword was, what if somebody wanted to make a model 1734 sword, have it blinged up a little bit, have a backsword blade, and the maker happened to be Nepalese, which is what Purna Darnal was. He was from Nepal. So you get stuff like the horn grip. You get the name. I believe this is actually spells out, I was made by Purna Darnal, something like that. This is Purna's basically signature on here, and it's in Purna's native language. Daniel did that because it wasn't uncommon on the swords that he was researching to see the maker's name on the blade. So that's why he thought it would be really cool to have Purna's name on here. I happen to agree. That's a nice feature, and I don't think I've ever seen anything made by Purna that has his name spelled out like this. So that's a really cool thing to see. So the scabbard for this sword has one really interesting feature. Well, it's got a lot of features to it, but one thing that's kind of a happy mistake on this is these bars of brass along both sides. When Daniel submitted his drawing to Purna for the scabbard, he intended for these to be just basically grooves cut into the leather of the scabbard. Purna instead interpreted it as putting these brass bars on both sides, and it was, like I said, it was a happy mistake because Daniel really liked the way it makes it really unique. And I happen to agree. I think that's a really cool addition to this scabbard. Now the leather on here is pre-stamped with a pretty cool design. It's not something that was hand tooled on here, but it is nice and an additional detail that really makes the scabbard pop some more. All of the metal on here is brass, and just by taking a quick look at it, you can tell that it is hand shaped. It's got a shape here, those two bars, and then mounting points. These mounting points are brass as well. And then the rings are butted, which I believe is correct for this type of sword, that what this is intended to be, although I'm not at all an expert in that. It's overall a very beautiful scabbard, and the fit is quite good. There's pretty much no rattle at all. And if I hold it upside down, it doesn't come out. I can shake it and it doesn't come out. And then basically the best way to draw it is kind of like a katana, push with your thumb and it comes right out. So overall, it's a very nice scabbard. It looks really great, and it's frankly pretty unique to this sword. The hilt on this sword is very much inspired by the Dragoon swords that sword friend Daniel researched. He did quite a bit of research on this. I already went over a lot of that, but it has some flair to it and some extra attention to detail to really make it stand out, especially the pommel with this rose shape here, and it looks great. I think this pommel in particular, it fits. It looks like something that you would see on a nicely designed, perhaps a bit upscale sword of this type. You can see that it is peened here, and the peen's pretty small, but it looks very solid. The grip section of the hilt is probably, to my eye, the most catching and most pleasing aesthetically. It's got these two ferrules on it, which are part of the standard for this type of sword, and they have some decorative carving in here to echo the rithing on the grip, and it's a very unique look to it. And then this grip is made from horn, and it is gorgeous. Purna Darnal had access to some really beautiful pieces of horn, and he really knew how to polish them and bring them out, bring the details in that horn out. It is just absolutely gorgeous. I love the way this looks. I will say it's a little thick for my taste, just a little bit bulky for my hands, but that's something that's all going to be specific to the user. It's not that it's too big or anything like that. It's just for my hands, it could use to be just a little bit smaller, and it would snug into my hands better and give me a slightly more secure grip. I have a good grip on this, but it could be even better. If I hold it like this, I can slightly rotate it a little bit. Not a lot, but I can rotate it a little bit. And if it's snugged into my hand just a little bit better, it would work better for me. But this isn't my sword, and it's not like it's wrong like this. Just not quite my shape. And the guard on this sword has a very distinct look with these panels that are completely solid, as is correct for this type of sword, and a D-guard that is integrated into the hilt. All very much correct for this type of sword, and it looks great. It is very solid. Just holding it, shaking it, moving it around, there is nothing could even remotely be considered loose on this, and it looks great. It's just an iconic look for a saber. I'm not sure if this would be considered a saber, but it is iconic to the look. It provides a ton of hand protection, and it also has this little, I don't know, I know there's a name for this, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's got that you see on a lot of hilts of this type. Overall, again, you can see a lot of flaws, and you can see where things were brazed together and all that kind of thing, but it's not perfect, and it's not intended to be perfect. Again, this is what you got if you were having Purna Darnal make something for you. You got handmade, and with handmade, you got flaws. And I should mention, when I say flaws, I don't mean functional flaws, I mean aesthetic flaws. All right, let's talk about the blade on this sword. So it is a single-edge sword inspired by backsword designs. You can see here it starts quite thick and has a ton of distal taper. And then right here, it transitions into a false edge. Now this false edge is not truly sharp. I wouldn't want to be hit by it, but I wouldn't call this a sharpened false edge either. The one interesting thing is that there's a plunge grind here. I'm not sure how authentic that is. Daniel probably could tell me, but it's executed well and it looks fine on the sword. One thing that looks just a tiny bit weird is this transition into the tip. It's not quite as smooth and evenly done as you'll see on a lot of period swords. Very minor detail, and honestly, who cares? It's still overall well done. And the blade is overall quite well done. There's some rippling on here, there's no doubt, especially on the spine. I can feel it. If I run my fingers along here, I don't really feel any rippling here. But if I look down it and really inspect it, I can see the rippling. There is one smooth bevel from the spine of the blade all the way to the edge. It is apple seated quite nicely. This is something Purna did very, very well. He would really take the time to make it one bevel with apple seated geometry, which is really good to see because the vast majority of swords historically were apple seated, and that helps to improve the durability of the edge. And if we look down the blade, it is absolutely straight, no bends in it at all. And I have impacted my cutting stand with this sword a little bit, and the sword has had no problem with that whatsoever. So that brings me to cutting. And keeping in mind that this sword is well out of my wheelhouse, I don't know what I'm doing with this type of sword. It cuts really, really well. I'm going to talk about this more in the handling section. It's not a fast sword. It feels not cumbersome, but definitive. It has a lot of authority in the cut. But it is a lot of fun to go out in the backyard and just cut water bottles with. I really enjoyed my time cutting it. It sailed through with most targets with very little trouble at all. It thrusts very nicely with a lot of accuracy, and overall is a lot of fun to cut with. And that's saying something for a sword that really is intended to be a cavalry sword. You know, those are not really intended to be all that fun for cutting on foot. You know, they're much more designed for chopping while on a horse. So for this to be that much fun in the backyard cutting is a testament to both the edge put on it and the design, but also just the overall effectiveness of this sword. So let's talk about handling with this sword. I'm not going to do any comparisons because frankly, I don't have any swords that handle or anything really remotely like this sword. So we're just going to talk about handling of this sword. First off, it weighs 2 pounds, 14 ounces. And let me tell you, it feels heavier than that. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. It just has a lot of blade presence, a lot of presence overall. There is a lot of weight in this hilt. Brass is not a light metal, and there's a big piece of brass here, another good sized chunk there. So there's a lot of weight in the hilt, and the blade starts very, very thick. So there's also a ton of distal taper here. So it weighs 2 pounds, 14 ounces, just under 3 pounds, which is not heavy for a single-handed sword. It's definitely not light, but it's certainly not on the overly heavy side. But it feels like it has a lot of power to it. It feels like it has a ton of authority to it, and it doesn't feel particularly quick in my hands. Like if I cut with it, it does not feel good to cut and stop. I want to cut and continue the motion into the next cut. And thinking about it, if I understand correctly, this type of sword would have been considered something of a cavalry sword. And there, agility is not as important as, length. It's a long blade, and being able to have a good grip on it. You're chopping down from a horse, something like that. You're not going to be caring about agility so much as power and decisive cuts. So that fits with this type of sword. But that's not to say it's not fun to use, because it is fun. It's got a good effective edge, it can cut very well, and it moves well. It just doesn't move particularly quickly or nimbly in my hands. If we look at the point of balance, it is balanced pretty close to the hilt for this type of sword. Oftentimes, single-edged post-Renaissance swords will be balanced a good 6, 7, 8 inches out from the hilt. Not all of them, of course, but oftentimes. And this one looks like it's more about 5 inches. And it's effective at that point. It's got some flex to it, definitely. And if we flex it here, you can see, especially out towards the tip, it flexes more right where the spine narrows dramatically into the false edge. So that makes sense. That's where it's most flexible. And therefore, because it doesn't have a ton, but it does have some flex to it, it's mostly rigid through a lot of the blade, though. I will say, looking at this, the hilt percussion node is a little bit higher into the guard than I would like. I feel the vibrations in my hand a little bit more than I would like. That's something that could be refined with just minor differences in weight distribution. But, that's not the case on this one. So overall, it's a good sword for moving around, but not a particularly good sword for, in my opinion, fast cuts. I can put the point where I want it pretty easily, but I don't feel particularly good if I'm cutting and then wanting to do a follow-up cut very quickly. That doesn't feel particularly good if I start like in a hanging. Basically, if I'm trying to do moulinets, I am terrible at moulinets, first off. And secondly, I'm not going to really be doing wrist moulinets because my wrist is still bothering me some. But if I do like elbow moulinets, it's certainly effective with them. But it doesn't feel quick doing them. It definitely feels a little laborious doing the moulinets. But again, I'm not practiced with them. So take that with a huge grain of salt. All right, so I'm not going to do a potential improvements on this sword because it doesn't really make sense. This is a one-off custom and the maker has passed away. And in addition, I'm not really going to do a bottom line telling you whether or not I think this was worth it. In fact, I'm not even sure what the final price of this sword was. I could ask Daniel. In fact, I will ask Daniel. I'll put it up on screen here. But it doesn't really matter. You can't go and have Purna make you one of these, unfortunately. So this is much more about being a showcase for what Purna was able to accomplish making a sword that it was completely outside his wheelhouse. He was a kukri smith who was taking custom orders for a wide variety of sword types, and not just swords, but all sorts of stuff. And this is very much outside that comfort zone. Purna went outside his comfort zone with regularity, and it's really astonishing what he was able to accomplish with basic tools in Nepal, where he did not have access to a ton of materials or tools. And what he was able to accomplish is really remarkable. It is a huge loss to the community for that he sadly passed away so early. So this sword is very fun to use. I think Daniel did a great job on the design. I think Purna did a great job executing the design. And I wish he was still around so that I could design something else and have him make me something else. I do have one sword that I designed that he made. I will treasure that sword forever. And if something comes up on the secondary market that Purna made as a custom for somebody, if it speaks to you, I recommend it. He had a lot of commissions that I know nothing about. Now, I can't guarantee every single one's going to have great handling or anything like that because he was so dependent on his customers' designs. He did not know the swords he was making, so he couldn't know what the correct distal taper is, know what the correct anything is for a sword like this or a medieval sword. He was a kukri smith, but if he got a good design, he could make an excellent sword. So it is definitely worth your while to try to find a sword that he made on the secondhand market if you want to own something really unique and different. And that's going to wrap up this review. I want to give a huge thank you to Sword Friend Daniel for allowing me to borrow this sword and hold on to it for a while to get this video done. For my viewers, even if you can't find something like a custom from Purna on the secondhand market, check out Great Gurkha Khukuri. His kukris were excellent. I am sure his family is doing him proud in making them, and they are not expensive. So check them out. And if you happen to like kukri, consider getting one. Until next time, Alien Toot out.